This time we'll go ahead and dismiss the junior hires to junior high Sunday school, so you guys are free to head on out. And as they're heading out, just a few things I want to share with you about the church and some of the things that are happening. We have some exciting news, and that is starting at the end of May, we're actually bringing on an associate youth pastor. And so that's really exciting. And what's been awesome during the process is we've actually been without a youth pastor for over a year now, and God has been faithful, and the youth ministry just continues to grow, and we've got a lot of people involved in that. And so Briston and his wife, Patience, are graduating from Boise Bible College this spring, and they're going to be coming here to serve in the youth ministry, as well as he also is going to help with preaching and worship. And just kind of a background on what the process has looked like. Search team has been praying about it for a long time and interviewing some candidates. And he came earlier this year and interviewed, and then came and visited youth group, and then came and visited church, and had dinner with staff and elders and spouses, and yeah, it was unanimous to bring him on. And so just be praying for their transition as they're going to be moving here at the end of May, and to just continue to raise up volunteers to help him as the youth ministry continues to grow. So yeah, I just want to make you aware of that. Also, I want to just share a little bit about the church and kind of the vision moving forward. One of the things that we've experienced the last several months, especially since January, if you've been here during first service on a lot of Sundays, not this morning because it's daylight savings time and I think a bunch of people maybe slept in, but oftentimes this has been packed as far as first service, and we've had a lot of people at first service, and second service has been growing. But here's the deal, like for us to continue to grow as a church, we need to be praying for more people in second service and also more volunteers in second service. What we've seen is that even though a lot of people come to the 8:30 service, a lot of our new people who come to church for the first time actually attend second service. And so what we would love to see is maybe every once in a while, for some of you who maybe normally come to first service, to see it as a mission to actually attend second service and welcome some of those new families, or maybe serve in the children's ministry during second service. For us to actually invite more people to come to second service, we have had more kids during second service, and so we actually have a need for more teachers. And so I'm going to invite Beth to just share a little bit about that.
Well, hello. I just wanted to start with some celebrations, too. I think it's appropriate because children's ministry is going really well right now, too. God's doing some great things down the hallway. So on average, each Sunday, we have about 50 kids checking in, and this is nursery through 6th grade. So about 50 kids. In order to make that happen right now, which I'll show you in a couple slides, that takes about 40 volunteers a month is what we have right now, which is amazing, right? So kind of what I do, I want people to make sure that they're attending service too. So typically it's 1 or 2 Sundays a month that people volunteer. So that's why it takes so many to run it. But I would love to see people volunteering every week and then serve one and attend one kind of thing. Come to for us one service and attend. And then I just wanted to celebrate. We kind of started a new thing. Ken Anderson made us a Plinko board. So when kids bring their Bibles, they get a quarter. And they get to play Plinko, and it's really fun. But the money that they're earning is going to our missionaries. So we've partnered with some of our church ministries and sent money for Karina Nix down in California. She's a teenager of one of our missionaries, and she was like leading a Bible study. So we bought her some like fun highlighters and paper. So we try to do stuff that kids can connect with. Right now we're raising money to buy some chickens through World Vision. They have really cool videos that help kids connect with it. Anyway, so I wanted to celebrate that because they've been having fun raising money, and they do it by bringing their Bible. So next slide. Each Sunday, we kind of have 5 different positions down in the hallway. One is a check-in, one is nursery, We have a preschool kindergarten class, and then Orange Room has our 1st through 3rd graders, and preteen has our 4th through 6th graders. So that's all the positions, and then the next slide will show kind of, oh, not that one. It's okay. Shows like first service, we have all classrooms open. Second service right now, we just are able to have nursery and Orange Room. So that means we have preschoolers through 6th graders in one classroom, which sounds like a lot of fun. And we do that because our numbers have been really low, but also volunteer numbers. So we just don't have enough volunteers to open up the preschool and the preteen classes. But last Sunday, Miss Billy taught, and she had 18 kids in there. So it's growing, which is awesome. But that would just be my hope, is that we can open up more classes in second service as we see second service grow. So kind of to make that happen, we need about 3 more nursery, 3 preschool kindergarten teachers, and 3 preteen teachers, which sounds really intimidating. 9 more teachers, that would be almost 50 volunteers, but it's a lot of fun. So I wanted to invite Chance up to kind of give you a view of what it might look like to teach, because he teaches with his wife down the hall. So he's really excited too.
Hi there. Yeah, so I guess about a year and a half ago, we decided to start just expanding what we do with the church, because for a long time, I've been in church my entire life, but I would say that now is the time that I've felt calling to do something a little bit more, get a little more involved with the church, and it has been an amazing experience. First off, I just want to say we have awesome kids in this church. They are so fun. They're so engaging. You've got a whole range of them. But one of the greatest supports that we have teaching these kids is actually the program that we've been following. Beth lays it out every week. You're given a whole pile of materials. Typically, you're only in the classrooms 20 to 30 minutes maybe, and there's so much material in there that you'd never be able to teach all of it. You've got, every week they suggest different games that you can play with the kids. They've got a great lesson plan. They've got videos you can watch. If you're in the younger kids' rooms, they've got sing-along videos, which the kids love, different arts and crafts. So there's a lot of material, and it really is more just facilitating than it is teaching. And you have a wide range of kids when you're in there, where kids who've maybe only been to church a couple times, or kids who've been coming to church for their whole lives. And it's a really great opportunity, or I felt it's a great opportunity to grow, because you can get asked the easy softball questions, who's Jesus, what did he do? And then sometimes you have the kids in there that can ask hard questions. So I just wanted to share that with you guys. It's a lot of fun. It's not as intimidating as it sounds, because I have never taught in church or anything like that, but the program they have here is great. So thank you.
Thanks, Chance. So I know I'm typically kind of hard to catch on a Sunday morning because I'm all over the place, but I'm going to station myself right by the map in the lobby after service. So I will be standing there. And if you don't see me standing there, then say, get back to your station. And I just have like this one sheet, just a piece of paper, no strings attached. If you want to take it home, I have one for nursery, check-in, and then just what it looks like to be a teacher. It just has some information about time frames and commitment level and what your duties would be, all that kind of stuff. So I'll be standing there. I also have sample lessons if you want to see the curriculum. I'll be standing there. If you're interested at all, come and talk to me. I would love to chat with you. So that's all I have.
Thanks, Beth. Appreciate that. Exciting to just see the children's ministry growing and opportunities to serve. If you have a Bible this morning, just want to encourage you to grab that and open to Mark chapter 6. That's where we're going to be as we just continue to work our way through the Gospel of Mark. I don't know if anybody else did this a few years ago, but during COVID, our family got a COVID dog. Like we got a dog during COVID. I think a lot of families did that, or a lot of people did that. And when we went to pick out our dog, one of my friends told me, I don't know if this is true or not, so you guys can take this home and try it and see if it works. He said that the way that you tell the difference between a dumb dog and a smart dog is you point in a direction, and a dumb dog will just sit there and stare at your finger. A smart dog will actually look at what you're pointing to. So I don't know if that's true. You guys can maybe try that out at home and see if that works. But he basically said, pick the one that looks where you're pointing, not the one that looks at your finger. What does that have to do with anything this morning? That's the real question, right? Well, here's what I think it has to do with what we're talking about this morning. As we work our way through Mark, like he just goes from one miracle to another, and he'll say, like, immediately Jesus did this, and then immediately Jesus did that, and he shows all of these miracles that Jesus did, and as Jesus was performing his miracles, some people just fixated on the miracles that he was performing. So some people, they just focused on what he was doing. They're like, okay, we've come to see, like, who's Jesus going to heal next? Like, what kind of thing is he going to do next? How is he going to control nature? What kind of demon is he going to cast out? Like, what kind of magic trick is Jesus going to perform? And they fixated on the miracles. And so crowds and crowds and crowds came to watch what Jesus would do. But Jesus' whole point in doing miracles wasn't random. They actually pointed to something, namely who he was, right? That he came as the Son of God, his authority, his power, and his purpose and what he came to do. And so what we see in this passage is Jesus is going to perform a miracle that's probably really, really familiar to all of us. And here's what's interesting about this miracle. Even his closest followers didn't understand what it was about. And the miracle we're looking at today is the feeding of the 5,000. How many of you guys have heard about that? Where Jesus takes some loaves and fish, multiplies them, and everybody eats, and there's lots and lots left over, right? We're familiar with that story. It's actually the only miracle that's recorded in all four Gospels. And this morning, the question I want us to wrestle with is, what was the point in doing that? Like, why did Jesus do that? Why did he multiply the loaves and fish in the middle of his teaching so that everybody could eat? Was it that everybody was really, really hungry? Was it to show Jesus' hospitality, that, like, if you're around Jesus, he's just hospitable, and if he's teaching, like, in the middle of that, he's going to give you food? Like, what was the point in Jesus feeding the 5,000? And my guess is, for most of us this morning, that's probably not on our radar. Like, we probably don't think about that because we've become so familiar with this story that it's, I don't know if it's this way for you, but for me, it's kind of, when I think of the feeding of the 5,000, like, it's kind of nostalgic. It's like picnic time with Jesus. And so I picture a big kind of grassy meadow, and everybody's sitting there, and Jesus is up there teaching, and he teaches for a long time, and it becomes lunchtime, and he's like, oh, nobody brought their lunch? That's okay, I'll take care of it. And he just begins to feed everybody around, and it's just this nice moment with Jesus that he takes care of us even when we forget our lunch. Okay, maybe not to that extreme, but I think when we think of it, we often don't think about what it's pointing to. And so my hope is that when we look at the miracles of Jesus, this miracle as well, that we can see what it is they're pointing to, why Jesus performed this miracle. And to understand it, I think we need the setting for when he performs it. So if you want to follow along, we're in verse 30 of chapter 6, and it says this: the apostles returned to Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. And so here's the setting. At the beginning of chapter 6, Jesus sends out his disciples. And so Jesus, he did come to heal. He did come to die on the cross for our sins, to conquer death and to rise again. But one of the reasons Jesus came is he had a mission to make disciples who then would make disciples so that the message and the good news of Jesus would continue to spread. That's why we're here this morning. And so in doing that mission and accomplishing that mission, one of the things he did during his ministry is he would just kind of train his disciples. And he'd be like, go try it out, see how it goes. And he would send them out to kind of do the things that he did. He would send them out to teach. He would send them out to cast out demons. He would send them out to share the good news of what he was about. And so he sends the disciples out, and if you kind of read through chapter 6, he gives them some pretty crazy instructions. He says, don't bring anything with you but a walking stick, no bread, no bag, no money. You can wear sandals, but don't bring a shirt. And he kind of gives these kind of weird instructions, and the question is like, why the specific instructions? And we don't really get an answer on to why the specific instructions, but I think one of the reasons he did that is so they would see their inadequacy without him, that they would be dependent on him for everything. That if they were going to move forward in the mission of Jesus, then it was going to be Jesus that accomplished it through them, and so they were going to have to depend on him. They were going to have to rely on him, to trust in him. And so they come back. The crazy thing is they're sent out, and they're actually able to do some of the things that Jesus was doing, and some of it goes awesome, and some of it doesn't go awesome. And so the setting for the feeding of the 5,000 is they come back, and they're trying to debrief, like, hey, how'd it go? And Jesus is going to give them some pointers and kind of give them some lessons on what they did right and what they did wrong and how to accomplish that. And as they land on the shore, what they see is there's actually thousands and thousands of people. Most scholars estimate between 10 and 15,000 people have shown up to see Jesus. And so they kind of see where he's headed in the direction, and they kind of run around, and they're ready for Jesus when he lands at the shore. And so here's what it says in verse 34. It says, when he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. And so he wants to debrief with the disciples, say, here's how it went, and kind of hear their take on it and kind of give them instruction, and he's interrupted by tens of thousands of people. And what's interesting is Jesus isn't annoyed by this, like he's not frustrated by it. It says he had compassion on them, like that they were like sheep without a shepherd. And that phrase has a lot of meaning. It has a lot of Old Testament meaning that they would have understood when he gives that to actually his identity. Psalm 23, most of us probably are familiar with that. Starts out, who's our shepherd? The Lord is our shepherd, right? And so in him saying, I'm the good shepherd, or they're like sheep without a shepherd, he's referring to himself as the Lord. In Ezekiel 34, he's quoting that. It's all about God being our shepherd and what shepherds are supposed to be like. Numbers 27, he would have had this in mind. Moses spoke to the Lord saying, let the Lord, the God of the spirits of all flesh, appoint a man over the congregation who shall go out before them and come in before them, who shall lead them out and bring them in, that the congregation of the Lord may not be a sheep that has no shepherd. And so as he makes this statement, he's fulfilling prophecy, that there would come a shepherd that would be the Messiah. And so Jesus is the Messiah in this moment. He has compassion on them. He cares for them, and he begins to teach. And so he's teaching these people all sorts of things. And notice what it says in verse 35. And when it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, this is a desolate place, and the hour is now late. Send them away to go into the surrounding countryside and villages, and by themselves get something to eat. And so if you can kind of picture the scene, like Jesus is teaching, and he's just going on and on and on and on. And we don't know which disciple kind of draws the short straw, but one of the disciples, like maybe they're kind of making eye contact, and like, somebody needs to tell Jesus, like, it's past lunch, it's like dinner time, it's time to wrap this up, like sing a closing song, like we need to get out of here, right? So somebody has to tell him he's been teaching way too long. And so one of them goes and talks to him, or multiple disciples come and they tell him, like, hey, send these people home, wrap this up. These people need something to eat. And notice his answer. I kind of like this answer. He says to them, you give them something to eat, right? So he says, why don't you take care of it? Not my problem. Like, you take care of the issue. And I think what he's doing here is he's testing them. He's testing them to see how they respond. And here's how they respond. They look at it very literally, and they look at all the resources they have, and here's what they say. They said to him, "Shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat?" And so scholars say this is like half a year's wages. So picture like $25,000, $35,000 worth of bread. So they say kind of sarcastically, should we take all this money and go get bread so that all these people can have one meal, right? That's their response. This is ridiculous, Jesus. We can't possibly feed these people. Just send them home. That's their response. And Jesus kind of presses in on them. Notice verse 38. Well, how many loaves do you have? He asks. Go and see. And so they begin to go around this crowd, 10,000 people. And here's what they found out. When they found out, they said 5 loaves and 2 fish. Okay, so they've got like a pack of rolls, a couple fish, right? And we're going to feed all of these people. And maybe they expected Jesus to say, "You're right, send them out to go home." But he wanted them to feel their inadequacy in this moment, to trust in him as their provider. And so here's what he tells them in verse 39. He says, "Then he commanded them all to sit down in groups on the green grass." So they sat down in groups by hundreds and by 50s. And so much like he sent them out to accomplish the mission, he's also sending the disciples out in this moment to take part in this miracle. But they need to trust him in this moment. In verse 41, it says, "Taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of the men who had eaten was 5,000. And so he just continues to multiply it. The disciples take out one basket, come back, grab another basket. There's more food, and they just continue to spread all of this food around until everyone had eaten. And so why does he do that? What's the point of this miracle? Well, as you read through the other Gospels, there's a lot of symbolism that's going on. Part of it is he's pointing to being the truer and better Moses, and in the way that God provided for his people in the desert. Jesus is our provider. He's come to be the good shepherd. He is Jehovah Jireh. He is the provider. Jesus is everything we need. And he is the bread of life. And so I think we think of bread, most of us think carbs. Some of us think, oh, we got to stay away from bread, right? That's not what they thought in the first century. Bread was symbolic of life. It was provision. It was everything that they needed. And so in John chapter 6, Jesus says this. He said to him, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall never thirst." And so part of the miracle is just to prove that Jesus is everything we need. But here's what we also know about this miracle. If we step back and look at this miracle objectively, this miracle was absolutely not necessary, right? So last week we looked at Jairus' daughter. She was very sick, and then she died, and Jesus needed to actually act in that moment to bring her back to life. There's other times when somebody's demon-possessed, and there's a need for that person to be free. But in this moment, Jesus just preaches along, and everybody is hungry, right? Anybody watch the show Alone? Anybody watch that show? No? Okay, just me. I like the show Alone. That's one of my favorite shows. Here's what I've learned in watching Alone. You can go a really long time without eating food, right? And in this moment, they just miss one meal, maybe 2. Like, this isn't a desperate situation. And here's what else we know. The disciples' plan was actually a good plan. Like, just send them home. They'll come back tomorrow, and you could teach them tomorrow, or send them home to get something to eat, and then they can come back later. Like, that seems like a great plan, but Jesus kind of creates this drama on purpose to perform this miracle so that they see their inadequacy, so they see how small they are and how big he is, so they see his power, and so that they depend and trust in him. So they see that he can do the impossible, that he's God over everything, that he is the king of the universe. And what's the next moment we see? Well, if you kind of work your way down through the rest of the passage, Jesus kind of messes with his disciples' thinking again. After he's done teaching, after they've eaten all this bread, after they've collected the food, the disciples get in a boat and they go out into the shore or out into the sea. And Jesus is like, "Yeah, I'll catch up with you later." Which, if I'm one of the disciples, I'm kind of like doing the math. I'm like, "Well, we've got all the boats. How is Jesus going to catch up with us later?" But they go out into the sea. Just so happens there's another storm, right? We talked about a storm last week. There's another storm. Jesus isn't sleeping. He isn't around, and so they're kind of freaking out in this moment, and all of a sudden they see Jesus like walking on the water, right? Another famous miracle. He's just walking by him. And when they see Jesus, they don't go, "Great, Jesus, you're here again to calm the storm." What's their response? They're like, "It's a ghost." And they freak out even more. And so they freak out that Jesus is walking on water. They freak out in the storm. He calms it, gets in the boat, and that makes them more afraid. And then he says this to them, and I think this is really interesting. Notice what it says in verse 50. It says, "But immediately he spoke to them and said, 'Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid.' And he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased, and they were utterly astounded." Okay, so they're blown away again. And then notice what Mark notes in verse 52. He says, "For they did not understand about the loaves, for their hearts were hardened." Somehow, the disciples saw the miracle. They saw what Jesus did, but they actually missed what it pointed to. Somehow they missed why in the world he multiplied the loaves, what that had to do with anything. And so Jesus kind of calls back this bread moment, and they don't understand in this moment his power over nature, and their response is fear. Their response isn't Jesus can do anything. Instead, they freak out like they're going to die again. And I think if you're reading this at a surface level, you can read kind of chapter 5 and then chapter 6, and you're like, those disciples, they're so silly. Like, Jesus just calmed the storm in chapter 5. He's here again. He calms it again, and they're still freaking out. How could they have forgotten what Jesus just did? How could they have forgotten that he can do the impossible? Why don't these people have faith? But I think the reality is, I don't know if you've experienced this, sometimes when we forget like past faithfulness, fear and anxiety creeps into our lives, right? Sometimes we forget what Jesus has done, and then in a moment of chaos or in a moment where things are kind of out of control, we forget that God is faithful. We forget that he's our provider. We forget that Jesus can do the impossible, that he can do anything, and our response is fear and anxiety instead of faith. I think some of us have looked at bills that have piled up and thought, man, there's no way I can pay these bills. And we've cried out to God, and he's been faithful to actually meet our need. Some of us have looked at a relationship and thought, man, there's no way God could restore this relationship. And we've cried out to God in desperation, and he's brought restoration. Some of you maybe have prayed for a friend or a neighbor or a coworker or a family member to come to know Jesus, and have cried out like, God, could you in some way bring them to Jesus? And it seemed impossible, but God radically changed their life. Maybe some have prayed for healing and experienced God answer that prayer. Maybe some have prayed that God would free you from sin that you never thought was possible to be free from, and God did that. And yet, as soon as things get difficult, we're quick to forget that he's the same God, that he was faithful then, and he's faithful now. And so why does God perform this miracle? What is Jesus trying to teach them in this moment? That nothing is impossible, that he's faithful, that he's the provider, and that we can trust in him from everything, that he wants to actually use us to be part of his purpose. He wants the disciples to come to a point where they say, I can't do this, but Jesus, you can accomplish the impossible. And not only does he do that, but I think also he gives us, in this story, really the first qualification for what it means to be a disciple, and that is to realize our inadequacy, that only the inadequate are actually adequate to be used by Jesus. 2 Corinthians chapter 3 puts it this way in verse 5. It says, not that we are sufficient in ourselves to claim anything as coming from us, but our sufficiency is from God. And so as he sends out the disciples, what's he trying to teach them? Trust in me. Depend on me. You can't accomplish this in your own power, but it's only when you realize your inadequacy that you see that I can accomplish the impossible. I love the way Craig Groeschel puts this. He says, you can have faith or you can have control, but you can't have both. And so what does it mean to be a disciple? It's surrendering our control, admitting that we're inadequate, and trusting in the sufficiency of Jesus, trusting that he is enough, that he's our provider. It's interesting, in Mark's account, there's actually something that's missing in the story of Jesus walking on water. Anybody know what's missing? There's a character that's missing in this story. Yeah, Peter, right? There's actually no account of Peter actually coming out and kind of having his big moment where he walks on water and then he realizes he can't, but Jesus is enough, and Jesus helps him in that moment. And if there's a gospel that would record the story of Peter, it would actually have been the Gospel of Mark, because the Gospel of Mark is actually Mark sitting down with Peter and saying, tell me the Jesus stories, like tell me how it happened. And yet in this moment, Peter's left out. Why? I don't know, right? I don't know exactly why this moment is left out, but it could have to do. It is possible that he leaves it out because it's not really about Peter. It's not really about his weakness. It's not really about his strength, but it's all about our dependence on him. It's all about a God who can do the impossible when we trust in him. It's about Jesus and his power to change lives. That when we trust in him, when we view ourselves as inadequate, then he's more than enough to accomplish his purpose through us. Jesus, he's actually going to break bread again, and so bread is symbolic throughout his ministry. Jim talked about it this morning, but the next time we see Jesus actually breaking bread in a symbolic way is when he does it with his disciples. And he says, in the same way that I'm breaking this bread, my body is going to be broken for you. It's a symbol of what he's going to do on the cross, that all of our sin, all the things that we've done wrong, he's paying the impossible debt that we incurred by sin so that we can be healed, so that we can be whole, so that we can be alive, so that we can trust that he's everything for us and join him in his mission, relying on him to accomplish his purpose through us. Will you pray with me? Father God, as we come this morning and as we look at the miracles of Jesus, God, I do pray that we would constantly be reminding ourselves of your faithfulness, of the ways in which you've shown up that in circumstances that seem impossible. And as we do that, as we look at your word, as we remember what you've done, God, I just pray that we would grow in our trust of you, that you are king, that you are in control, that you can do anything, things that we would look at and say, that's impossible. It's possible with you. And so, God, we just want to be used by you. And God, I just pray that we would see that you're enough, that you are our provider, that you've given us everything you need. It's in your name we pray.